All right, so today we are preparing for ARM Mobile. Basically, I really want to cover a couple of features in ARM that will be very important for using ARM Mobile. I think both of these features really stand on their own as well. So even if you're not quite ready to take the dive into ARM Mobile, hopefully you'll learn something valuable even for just your regular ARM use. And really the two big features to cover today are your personal lists and SEs, or standard evaluations. So we'll start with personal lists. And actually, I want to introduce some new development that is coming. It's not quite in the latest released version of ARM, but we'll see it pretty soon here. It should be coming out with the next update of ARM, giving personal lists kind of a facelift, if you will. We're kind of giving it a rebranding to be called a favorites instead. So we're not really changing a whole lot of functionality. All of the lists that you've been using, if you have been using them, will stay the exact same. But hopefully just a little bit easier to use. And I think especially for new users to ARM, it'll be a lot easier to get started with the lists. So basically here, just to kind of preview what the changes are. The personal list we're going to call favorites. It has that nice star next to the name of it. And so we kind of brought the full list, or the master list as we have typically called it, and the personal list, and I'll call it favorites, all on the same window. So hopefully a little easier to find and encourage people to use. So there's no more of that button down here where you display personal, display master, and the whole screen changes to load the two different lists. They're all kind of cohesive in one spot. And instead of calling that master list a little less technical term, just display all. See everything that's possible, see just the favorites that you've chosen. And then we have a little shortcut button to make it even easier to add something to your favorites list. So we'll see that on my computer today, and coming soon to your computer in ARM with the next update here. Some tweaks also to what in the past I've called user built lists. So things like your product list, we don't have, there's not a master, dictionary for products like that, and some other lists that you kind of populate yourself with your specific, application equipment or your product list. Those don't have a, master list to have a favorites for. But there are some updates to that as well. So we have a little X button that'll be make it easier to delete an item from the list. And then we've also brought an edit button to the list. And basically that will open up, that contents of everything you've built in that list, open it up almost like it's an Excel, where you can just click into any cell and adjust a value if you need to. So that'll hopefully save some time. Currently, it's a little bit clunky if you want to just, update. Maybe the product had a slight change in its name or something. The old way, you'd have to delete the item from the list, then make the change in ARM, and then re-add it to the list. So hopefully just be a little easier to work with it. If you need to make a small change to something that's in that list already, you can just hit the edit and change that value. So again, this is all coming soon here in ARM. Hopefully, make it easier to use these lists, and we really want to promote it because of ARM Mobile. So if you joined us last week for our Introduction ARM Mobile webinar, we kind of covered this in detail. But I just kind of wanted to pop open this workflow here, just in case you missed it, just to highlight kind of where this fits in and why we're really wanting to emphasize these personal lists in going forward. So this was kind of the overall workflow. And if you recall, there's really two components from your ARM software that's currently running on your PC that are going to be involved with the ARM mobile app. And so the first component we talked about was the base information. And that was really your favorites lists, your personal lists. And we'll see the full list of all of the lists kind of involved with this. But pretty much anything kind of related to assessments is going to come with. We're going to actually copy those lists into a folder that's in the cloud. So that way your ARM mobile on your phone can download those lists, and that'll be the basis for what you're entering into ARM mobile when you're taking notes and describing the assessment, describing the pest, the crop that you're seeing when you're performing that assessment. So that's really the key. We really don't have, it would be such a larger download if we try to include all of the master lists instead. You can just imagine with the pest list, just how long of a download that would be and how much not fun that would be to scroll through that list if you're trying to pick a specific weed that you're looking at on your phone. So we really had to say, well, we need to narrow it down. And so we'll leverage the personal lists, the choices you have made on your individual machine as to what matters to you. And so that's really the goal of the personal list and how it fits in to ARM mobile. Oops, going the wrong direction here. So let me open up my ARM. And just to show real quick that new development, the new windows here, kind of live. So if I'm in my treatments editor and I open up the treatment name, that will show me my treatment list. And so here again is just some of the slight changes to the screen by and large. Of course, the list itself will remain the same. We aren't changing the way it really functions, but just kind of the appearance of the items in the list. And then also it'll be easier if I don't need this version of this product anymore. A pretty simple click will delete and will confirm to make sure you didn't accidentally click the button. Yep, clear that one out of there. And again, you can also use the edit button here and be able to make changes to the list. It's also pretty easy to add more items to the list. I'll cheat here and just grab, but if you had something in like Excel or something, you could certainly copy and bring in new rows. Here I kind of cheated and used products, so I'll have a bunch of duplicates, so that'll be a mess, but that would be another easy use of this edit feature to add a bunch of items kind of all at once if you'd like, and just kind of watch how many columns that you have to line up the information. And maybe I'll switch over. Let's find a personal list. We'll just go into the assessment data and maybe grab the part rated or something here. It's taking a minute to load for some reason. Software never behaves itself as soon as you're showing it to someone else, right? I must have too many things running on my computer. Yes, while it goes here, we'll just back up to the screenshot to highlight that rating type would have been one I'd go to. We'll see the full list of all of the options. And it's just a matter of adding them to your favorites to populate the list of the ones you use most often. And that list will be what we really bring in with ARM Mobile. And this is just still locked up. That is not great. Well, I'll move to the next portion while I try to reset ARM in the background here. So kind of to recap, the validation lists, they're really not just for ARM mobile. So hopefully, although it'll be a really core part of using the mobile app, hopefully you don't just tune this section out, because there's a lot of use for these lists just in your regular ARM usage. And so, really one of the core parts and features of ARM itself is the standardization and the consistency that it brings. And so you really always want to be picking items from the list when there's a list available in a certain cell as you're describing your trial. That's just a good practice to always use those codes. And so depending on the list, of course, there might be a lot of options because ARM is used in a ton of different type of research. So most likely you're not going to use all of those options. So you're going to want to use those favorites or the personal lists. And that'll help you save time looking through those lists. Once you find it once, put it in your personal list so that way you only have half dozen or 20 items in that list of things you typically use and see, so you're not always looking through the master list to find those items. And then another advantage, if you're in a company with a lot of ARM users, you can even standardize across the company. So we have a little workflow that we can help you set up. It doesn't take much work at all. We set up a couple of files and ARM can sync from kind of a common library within your company, all of those personal lists. So that can be a great leveling up for your group as well, to say, all right, we should have everyone really have the same favorites lists. We're all working on the same set of crops and the same set of pests. And we've got, so-and-so in our group that's been using ARM for 20 years already. We should probably it'd be great if I just had the same list as they did, so I don't have to fill mine in. So if that's an interest to your group, just contact us. Like I said, it's usually 2-3 emails back and forth, figuring out, all right, what's a great place, a common place to store these files. Here's what you do to get your ARM connected. And then you'll have everyone being able to kind of share lists and have looking at the same thing. So that can be a good time saver as well. All right, I've got my ARM back up here and operational. Fingers crossed, I guess we'll see. We'll try this trial one more time. All right, so backpedaling just a little bit to the discussion with these lists and ARM Mobile specifically. Under the Tools menu, there is a Connect EDC, Connect to Electronic Data Collector. And this will really be the interface for you to send out the information from your ARM out to the cloud where ARM Mobile can use it. So you may have been here already if you've been using the Excel rating shell or the Mirrors connection. We've now added another option to utilize the ARM Mobile app. And so part of that setup, we won't dive into all the details, but part of the setup is to point ARM to the cloud storage service that's running on your computer, so that way it can copy that information out there. And there'll be some folders that get set up to kind of assist and have that translation and copying of information to and from your ARM mobile phones or tablets. So I'm going to go down here to Edit Mobile Lists. And this will come up automatically the very first time you set up ARM Mobile as well, but you can always get back to it from this button. And so this is really the personal lists that ARM Mobile will use. So if you want to kind of sit down and say, all right, let me prepare myself to start using ARM Mobile, this would be a very good first step, is let me go through all of my personal lists or my favorites that are specifically going to be sent out to the cloud. And so we've collected them all in a nice list here, so you don't have to bob and weave through ARM to find all these locations. And we've arranged them so these first 4 are required. So you need to fill these in order to really utilize the app. So the assessed by, that is really your user list for the ARM Mobile. When you first log into the app, you have to select the assessed by to say, this is who I am. And so I've got a few names and a few fake people, because I have people demonstrate the app with me, but you would certainly want to put in, real people when you're doing that. And so that's why that's required, the assessed by. And so that is already on your assessment editor as the assessed by. And I think it's also kind of similar to the applied by list too. I think they're all kind of linked together there. These other three are unit selections. So the unit for your sampling, your sample size, collection basis, reporting basis, all kind of related to subsampling. Again, you just click the edit list, and that will bring up the dialog where you can see the master of all of the options. And when you see one that you want to include, you can just add it to your favorites list, or if you're doing it today on your ARM, it'll be add to personal, and you can fill in your list. And again, this will be the options then when you are in the application and you're wanting to choose a sample size as you're filling in and describing your assessment. This will be what you see. The drop down in the app will be your favorites list or your personal list of the options to choose. So that's really the importance of filling these in. You can always update. So if you've done this once and then you're out in the field and realize, there's some I should have added, you can always come back here, just as I had done, use the edit mobile lists, make some adjustments, and then you'll notice at the end we have a button to update and close. And that will then resend out the lists with the updated contents out to the cloud. And on your mobile app, you can just reload the base information folder, and that'll download the updated lists to each phone. So just going down the list real quick, there's the unit for the crop pest, the diameter, height, and density. Crops are important, as are pests. Of course, just depending on your research, maybe you don't use any non-taxonomic pests, so it's possible to be empty. So you can see ARM will just bold to let you know if you have an empty list. Unless it's a required one though, it's not going to throw any errors if you don't have anything in there. But this is just a nice way to review and just go through each one. And there's this progress bar just to kind of give you a snapshot of how many lists you've looked at and have something in. So right now I'm sitting at 14 out of 17. So if I did want to add a non-taxonomic code, I'll just pick one here and add to my favorites. Then it'll update and see I've got at least one item in there. So now I'm a little bit closer to having something in all of the lists. Again, if you never use it, would never use the list, of course, it can remain empty if you need to. As I mentioned, now update and close will update that base information that will be in the cloud for all of my mobile apps to refresh and pull down and utilize. So that's really the personal lists here and how they pertain to ARM Mobile. And there's one question just about the ARM Mobile licensing. And so if we have time at the end, I'll kind of give a recap of that. We did kind of go through the licensing and some FAQs in our last webinar. So if you want to check out the recording on our website, you can kind of see all of those details on ARM Mobile. Go back to my presentation here. So the other topic that I want to cover today is standard evaluations. or SEs? So we'll start out really basic in case you've never encountered these files before. An SE is a saved description of an assessment. So we usually refer to that as that area in ARM as the assessment header. All of those details that you use to describe the rating that you've performed. And so that file consists of one or more columns. You can pick particular rows from that column. So when you're saving this to a file, you don't have to have everything that was used to describe that rating, but you can choose specifically what pieces of information you want to save to that file. And then you can also include study rules. So any study rules that are applied to that column, if you have like a requirement to fill in the rating date when data is filled in, or requiring the pest density for a particular assessment, that has to get filled in. If you have study rules related to that column, those also can be saved to an SE file. And really the goal of the SE then is to always use the same description when you perform that same rating. So it's a great standardization tool in order to, time and time again, every time you're going to take that same assessment, you can use the exact same description. You would just load in that SE file, and that'll copy that description into a new column for you to take that rating again. So and again across the same study, across all of your trials, you can use the same description. Another way to think of it really is a virtual clipboard. So kind of the most common, I think the most common thing people do when they're in ARM ready to plan out another assessment is they would go and look at a column that they've already filled in and would just highlight the rows, hit copy, and then go to the new column and click paste. And then they can adjust from there what details might be different. That's essentially what we're doing with an SE file is creating a virtual clipboard of that column or multiple columns. But the advantages are, number one, you get to pick which rows, so you don't have to include the rating date and then remember to delete it out. You can do that over and over again without having to go back and find the column because it's already saved to a file. And then you can also do that across all the different trials that you have. So you're not having to open up the last trial and go find a column and then copy and paste. So all of that functionality is rolled into just having an SE file saved onto your computer so you can use it again and again. It's essentially a powered up copy and paste of a header. And so the reason these are really important is it can save you time. From a trialist perspective, having to go in and fill in each header can be a little time consuming, even if you're using those favorites lists. You can really speed that up by having all of those choices made for you with just a couple clicks, load that SE, boom, there's 12 rows, 15 pieces of information, all just copied in instantly instead of having to fill it in. So that can save you time just filling in the editor to describe your assessment. Then there's the consistency. Just within your own work, it's great to be consistent. If your research is contracted out, your trials that you're providing are going to be more consistent for the sponsors, and thus they're going to be more valuable. So earlier this week, we had the protocol writers, and we talked to them about SEs and why they should create them and send them to the trialists. And we showed them how important that is for them because they might have one protocol and send out 12 trials. And if there's 12 different trialists all putting things in their own way, it's a lot harder to put those 12 trials together to do a multi-trial analysis. So, if anyone's ever had to use and learn ST, they know firsthand, how much of a pain that can be. Computers just aren't very good at seeing two slightly different things and realizing that they're the same. A human can kind of look at the description. Oh, this is a stand count. Yep, this is the stand count. I have 3 different people who filled in the headers slightly different, but they're all stand counts. So, the human brain, it's really easy to combine those mentally, but a computer really, really struggles. So it's a lot harder to put those together. So on the trialist side, if you can utilize SEs and make your trials all consistent, those are more valuable then to that sponsor because they will be able to combine. There's not this huge overhead on their side to combine the data. When they get the data, boom, it'll all be combined and they'll be able to make decisions very fast and really like those trials that are that way compared to the trials that they have to hand edit and get to gel with the other ones. So you're really going to boost your value. And so for that reason, we really stressed for those protocol writers to start using SEs. And so, from today's perspective for a trialist, it's about let's see if the protocol writer has provided us SEs. And maybe if they haven't, we should ask them why, because we really would love to use the SEs that they've provided so we can be the most valuable to them, that they can process the data much easier. And then of course, the last why is ARM Mobile. So as we saw with the personal lists are all brought in to ARM Mobile. Part of that base information are SEs. And so when you are in the mobile app, so this is kind of a screenshot of the mobile app and you're ready to take an assessment, you can either use a data column that was already filled in with the header details, but hasn't had data taken yet. Those will just kind of appear in the app. But maybe there's an assessment that needs to be done that you didn't plan out, didn't already have set up ahead of time, and you're already in the field. You have these 3 options are really the ways you can create a new assessment column from ARM Mobile to be copied back to your trial. And so you can do an ad hoc and basically have to hand fill in every detail of the header on your phone while you're standing there ready to take your notes, which would be an incredible headache. I think it would be very frustrating. At least for me, it would be frustrating when I'm just ready to take an assessment and I'm stuck here fiddling with my phone trying to put in the details. The second option is to copy a column. So if you have an assessment as part of that trial definition already on the phone, you can copy those details to kind of reuse them. And then maybe there's a slight tweak to that description and then you're ready to go. But again, that assumes that there is an assessment, header already present with that definition. The third option is to use an SE. And so that's really where some time that you put in now in the off season to create these SEs can really save you time then in the field, because you can then load an SE. As we saw, that can be 1 or more assessment columns that are standardized. So they're already filled in. Just a couple of clicks, use standard evaluation, pick the one from the list, and now you have both assessments that you need to do for that rating or whatever has been kind of encapsulated in that SE. So it's a huge time saver. As soon as I kind of saw that functionality in the mobile app, I said this is what we have to get on the bandwagon and beat our drum loudly to get people to use SEs, because I think the mobile app will be so much more user friendly in that sense for you if you're able to fill in that assessments with just a couple of presses. That whole SE is loaded and you're ready to take notes instead of having to fiddle around with an ad hoc typing in some information, to jot down what you're going to do. And then when you get back to the ARM on your computer, you'll probably have to fill in the rest of the details that you didn't want to fill in on the phone. Compared to using that SE, it's all filled in with a single click. There's nothing extra you have to do back in the main ARM file because it's already filled out. And then the data just comes in and you're good to go. So avoid some headaches and some pain out in the field later by putting a little time in now in the off season to standardize these. So we'll kind of go back and forth from ARM to this list of tips and tricks, kind of how to really implement SEs. And so the first one for the trialist perspective, as I mentioned, we really told the protocol writers earlier this week, you need to do SEs. You need to either create them or find them. We do have a master list in ARM with some examples. But we really stress that a protocol should have SEs in them. So that way, when they're sent to the trialist has the SEs they should use. So when you receive either a protocol or a trial, one of the first things that you should maybe look at least when it pertains to the assessments to perform, would be, does this trial have SEs? Have I been given SEs to use in this study? So really the first place to look for that would be in the site description, or if you've been given a protocol, it'll be in the protocol description. Either of those both have an SE definitions section. So this is what we told the protocol writers earlier, is to fill in the SE definitions section with the names of the SEs that the trialist should use. So if you have information here on the SE definitions of a file that you've been given, that would be instructions to say these are standard evaluations that should be used in the trial. So I have just a couple of examples here. So I have an SE for a disease severity. And then there's also a disease index. So if I'm supposed to do these assessments, instead of just hand filling in what I typically do for severity, I should use this SE instead. And notice that they already have the description filled in for me. So there's no point in filling that in. I can just load this disease severity SE, and I'm up and running and ready to take the notes. So to load that, if you are ready to take that note, here within ARM, you can go to the assessment data section. And there will be a row. I must have something weird in my assessment data. I don't know why it is causing such grief here. There will be a row in the header called SE name. So it's the very same description as the SE definitions where we saw the SE name. That's really the interface for the SEs. I don't know if it's because I'm on a separate monitor or why my ARM is just not behaving. I apologize here. Let's try one more time. But we'll utilize the SE name field that's in the assessment header. And there's a list associated with the SE name. And that is, you'll see, is actually the list of SEs that we saw on the SE definitions section. I'm going to try moving this to my other monitor and then loading the study. I don't know if it's a display issue or why it's not behaving itself today. Yeah, go figure. Now it is working. We'll see how long it lasts. Here in the study, you'll see an SE name. And this might be hidden by default, just depending on your view options. If you don't see the SE name, it should be right underneath your rating date. If you don't see that, just use your hidden fields. So over on the properties panel, this is the list of all of the rows currently hidden from view. And so you might need to turn that on to make it visible. But in the SE name, as I said, there's a personal list here. And this list is actually the list of SE definitions that protocol writer has filled in. So it's basically creating the set list of what SEs to use in the trial. So here, if we're going to use our disease severity, we can actually see on the right, there's a preview of what this SE contains. And so in this case, we actually have, let me move the screen a little bit to see everything. We actually have 2 assessment columns that are included in this SE. So it looks like there's the disease severity as a percent. It looks like we're looking at the third leaf 3. That'll be where we fill in our data. And there's a second column that's actually an Abbott's calculation. So we really only have to fill in one assessment, and then they have included the calculation that they'll want to have as a summary of the data we filled in. So if that's the one I'm ready to use to take that disease severity rating, then we can select OK. And this will load that SE. Let me hide my properties here so we can see the 2 columns next to each other. So we don't have any pest or crop information saved into the SE, so I would be able to fill in the pest details for this particular study. But you can see that everything else, the part rated, rating type, rating unit, all of those details have been copied in from that SE file right into my ARM study. And this very same action is what happens in ARM Mobile if we were to choose that SE when we're ready to take the data in the mobile app as well. We won't have the calculated column. ARM Mobile is kind of smart enough to recognize a calculated column is not something we'd fill in. So in ARM Mobile, we'd only see this first column because that's where we'll enter data. And then when the data is transferred into the ARM file, then ARM will populate this calculation column as well, and we'll fill it in. So from the trialist perspective, if the protocol writer has included SEs, then hopefully you're in great shape to just start using them. You don't really have to set anything up. Those files have been provided to you, and it's just a matter of using what the protocol writer wanted you to use to have that standard description. If you haven't been given SEs in a particular study, you can build your own. So I'll go real briefly over some of what we covered in Tuesday's session for those protocol writers who really do want to set out to create their library of SEs. It can also apply to a trialist as well. If you aren't given SEs, you can still standardize your own self if that protocol writer does not have some. So really the best place to start would be back on the SE definitions section. We can pretend this is blank here, or I'm just going to insert some new columns. Let's insert maybe just 3 empty repeating sections here. So if your study doesn't have any SEs, then this tab will be blank and it'll just have 1 empty column. And really one of our tricks, let me just go back to that PowerPoint just real briefly. If you're doing it yourself, creating your own, one trick is really to start with the built-in list of SEs. So here on the SE definitions, looking at the SE name list, there's a personal list of SE files you've used. There is also a master list of SEs. So there's 700 or 800 SEs that we have in ARM kind of as a standard library, if you will, of SEs. And you can see just clicking on each one will show in the preview kind of what it's all about, what the part rated rating type, subsample details might be. Some of these with the underscores C4, for example, means there's 4 columns. So here it looks like there's, it's maybe for a potato study, you're counting the number of tubers in certain classes. And then the first column is going to create a calculated severity index based on those 3 assessments that you fill in, for example. So really, I would start here if looking to get going with SEs and create your own. Really, actually go and try to find one that's already been created for you. I think the best way to do that would be to utilize the SE description, and you can right-click to do a filter for to basically search all of those descriptions for a keyword of what assessment you're going to do. Maybe I want to look to see what SEs there are for a count type of assessment. And so again, this now narrows down the list. In this case, it's still a pretty general search term, so we still have a lot of options, but they're all counts. So it's all SEs where the word count exists anywhere in the SE description. This is a cascading filter, so if you do know maybe the part rated, you could either hand type that in, or the gold box is a list of all the unique values in this column. So maybe you know for sure that you're going to count, you're looking at insect eggs. I need to count insect eggs. So let me look at only SEs where the part rated is egg. And then we can see different examples, maybe how they are done. So just depending on what is described, some of them are different. We can decide what's the best one to utilize. So maybe we're counting the eggs in soil. Maybe that's what we want to do. We like the way this is described. So we can say okay, and that will load that SE into the definitions. And again, this SE definitions is really creating the list of SEs associated with this trial, so that when you are in the assessment data section, ready to take a rating or fill in an assessment that you've done, then you'll see that in the SE name. So you can load that SE, and let's do our count of eggs in soil. And that will fill in all the details of that saved assessment. And that description is there for us. So now we can fill in our data. So that's a good way to get going, because it can be a little intimidating just to start creating these SEs. Well, out of where? How do I start? Find some from that list. Another option would be you can create your own. And so you could open up like last year's trial, or if you're in an empty trial, you could always use the merge, which will copy certain information from another file into the one you have open, and copy in the headers that you used in last year's study. Then once you have the header that you would want to save to an SE, then just right click and export SE. And this will kind of show us those different components to the SE if you want to save your own. So the first question is, which assessment columns do you want to include? And as we said, we certainly can include more than one if you would like. In this case, maybe we're just going to do this assessment, the egg count. Then the next question is, which rows of the header do you want to include? So as we said, you don't have to include everything that's in that column, which will be very great for that last year's trial where you might have the density and you might have the crop height and different details that you filled in that would be specific to that trial. You wouldn't want to include that in the SE. You would only want to include the pieces of information that would be the same every time you perform that assessment. So ARIM's kind of remembered the last selection I made, but you can always clear that and hand choose the pieces of information that you would like. And maybe the sample size could differ. You can certainly leave that out if you'd like, or if that is part of the standardization you want to do, you can include that. ARIM's view here tries to narrow down to the most common items you'd want to include, but if you do want to see everything, you could open up the view and view like all fields or something. But just depending on what you want to include in the column. Again, you really wouldn't want to start bringing in details that would be specific to that one trial, because you're going to load this into many different trials. Once I click OK, if there were any study rules present, that was that other component that we talked about earlier. If there were study rules that were in that column number 3, then there'd be just a short dialogue to show us which ones there are. So we know that there's some study rules being saved in this SE file. In this case, we didn't have any. So then we're prompted to save the SE onto our computer so we can use it again and again. So I typically recommend the name to be something descriptive of what it is you're doing, so you know what to choose from in the future. The SE name does have a certain limit to the number of characters, so you don't want to be too long, try to be somewhat brief. And then you'll see in the next step that there is a description. So now you have more characters if you need to be a little more verbose about what you're doing. And here, this is pre-filled because we started with a description. So we had something entered into the SE description already. It's defaulted here, but we could certainly adjust it, in reference to my company or whatever you want to include in there. And now it will save that SE onto my computer so I can use it again and again. And here, it just popped open that folder for me, but I don't necessarily need to go find it. So then when you're creating those SEs on your computer, the very first time you use it, so here I'll go back to the SE definitions, and let's get rid of this one now that we've saved our own, even though I don't think we made any changes really to it. But the very first time you would use an SE that you created yourself, you'll want to right-click and insert that SE from File. And we'll browse to the folder here again and see just the SEs that have been created. And I will load that SE here. And once you've loaded it from File once, it is added to your personal list. So here in my favorites, in this case, it is in my favorites list for the SE name. So I can load that again and again. And now that that's in my favorites list, I will see it on my ARIM mobile. So when we do that, the exporting of the base information, this SE will be available to me on my phone for when I want to take an egg count assessment. Which might be a poor example. That's probably more of a lab thing to do, but at any rate, that's the, I guess, the real short run through of SEs. Again, it's a little hard to train on SEs. It's one of the harder ones, at least for me as I'm describing it, because it's so ingrained into what you're doing. As far as that assessment. And so I have some generic assessment, and I'm just picking things because I'm not a researcher, and I'm just grabbing things as an example. But I think it's much more, hopefully much more interesting when you are on your computer and creating your SEs to really bring to life what it is you're doing. And standardizing that, and just put in a little time now in the quiet part of the season before things get crazy and before you're out there in the field a lot. Put a little time in now to make the standardization effort, and it'll save so much time later on when time is much more valuable, because you'll have these descriptions already there. And again, if you're a trialist where you're doing a bunch of contract work, ask the question of do you have SEs? If you get a protocol or a trial from a sponsor and they don't have any, they don't have anything in the SE definitions, ask them, and maybe they do have SEs and they just didn't think you knew how to use them, or maybe they hadn't considered it, and really should put some pressure on them to consider using SEs. The worst case is that they could go to the master list and say, oh yeah, well, we looked and that F080, that's a good one to use. Do you just want to use that? The nice thing with the master list is everyone has these 800 SEs. Every ARM has them. So you don't have to worry. With the custom files, those custom SEs, of course, those need to come across and include them with the trial. But if you're just working from this master list of SEs, your computer has the exact same SE that theirs does. So even if they didn't think to select an SE when they first set it up, it'd be very easy to work together to find one in the master list to cover the assessment. And then maybe they can tell all their trialists to use F128 for the disease, the percent disease rating. So that way now suddenly you've brought even more value, because now they're encouraging them to standardize, and their lives are going to be a lot easier when they're getting their data back. And everyone used this F128. They don't have to go in and adjust headers and figure out how to combine them, combine them for them automatically. Looking at the tips and tricks, we did cover the study rules a little bit. I do have one last item I want to point out, and that is in the assessment header. And if you've taken training from me before, whether it's a webinar or some sort of one-on-one training, and we've discussed filling in assessment headers, I have an admission to make. We learned that this description row here on the header, in past years, I've described that as a nice way to put a human readable description of what you're doing in your assessment. So here, if we were doing this count of eggs, I would explain how to pick apart rated, rating type, rating unit. It's very good to use each of those fields individually to be specific about what assessment to do, pick from the list so it's standard, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would say now the description is a nice way to just make a human readable description of the assessment. And that's a great way for the human mind to really quickly understand what that rating is. But you do need to fill in all of that information to be very specific. Well, it turns out this description typically was visible by default, and the SE description was hidden by default. But when we went to develop ARM Mobile and we're picking which rows should show up in the application, we realized that this description is actually supposed to be the crop description. So you'll notice that we have all of these fields related to the crop code, name, variety. This is actually intended to be the crop description, an additional comment or details about the crop chosen. The real description for what this assessment is all about, what is this rating, that is the SE description, which I think the name is maybe a little, it makes it easy to throw people off because that seems as if it only matters if you're using SE files. It does not. So this SE description, whether you choose to implement SEs or you're not ready for that at all, ideally you want to use this SE description field, this row here, as the human readable, what is this assessment? And so in the mobile app, you'll see that the description of the assessment that we use is coming from the SE description row and not the description row. So if you already have assessments, in years past, you've used the description. I think just about everyone probably does because all the studies I've ever seen always have used this description. My recommendation would be just click on the description name here. That'll grab the entire row of whatever descriptions you have. And I would just do a copy paste. And I would go down to the SE description and paste. In this example, it's a terrible example because I have some SE descriptions filled in and not the regular description. So it would probably make a mess. So I'm going to say no to it and cancel. But that is what I would do to at least duplicate the descriptions you've already been using into the SE description row. And that way, number one, your mobile app will have that description because that's the only field the ARM mobile app uses. And number two, you can start to transition into using SE description. So we were pretty flabbergasted when the programmers came back and said, yeah, this is what it's supposed to be, and this description is intended to be the crop description. I'm like, oh, great. I've been leading people wrong for years. So hopefully we'll spark a revolution of sorts to get people moved over from description into SE description moving forward. One more thing real quickly, kind of related to which pieces of information are going to be used in the mobile app. In the views section on your properties panel, we've created a couple of default views related to ARM Mobile. So this default ARM Mobile, which you might not have on your machine yet, we'll have that included in the next version of ARM. If you do want to get a hold of it early, I can simply send you the file. Just send us an email and I can. But this view will show only the header rows that are sent to ARM Mobile. So if you fill in your assessment header with the intent of it being used in ARM Mobile, these are the rows you will see in ARM Mobile. There are a lot of other fields that can be utilized in the full ARM, but you won't see them in ARM Mobile. The other related view is ARM Mobile SE. So these are the fields that will be loaded in the mobile app if you load an SE in the app. So again, this would be kind of the target for taking a rating with ARM Mobile. This is the kind of the pieces of information that will be included if you're saving an SE. And then in the mobile app, we saw that screenshot here a little bit ago where you use standard evaluation. That view in ARM will show you this is the pieces of information that can be loaded into the mobile app. And then of course will arrive in your ARM trial when you've brought the data back. So just hopefully some point of references as you start to build if you're thinking of implementing ARM Mobile to know exactly what is going to flow back and forth. All right, I think we covered all the main bullet points for the tips and tricks, and really saw how to at least get going with SEs, and also the personalists, which are soon to be called favorites, although I'm sure I'm going to call them personalists forever and ever still anyway. But definitely reach out if you have any questions as you're trying to get going with utilizing SEs or filling your lists. I can hang on here if there are some questions for a few minutes, but we have reached kind of the end of the hour. So if anyone has to go, certainly don't want to hold anyone up. I appreciate everyone who joined today. Again, if you have questions, feel free to send them in here. I'll hang on for another minute in case there are. And if you do have questions in general about ARM Mobile, as I said, we did have our introduction webinar last week, and you can find some information on our website or get a hold of us. I see Michelle has the email if you'd like to learn some more details about ARM Mobile. Dawn in our office will be ready and happy to help with any details you might need. As I said, we've got some content on our website too, just for you to kind of check out and get to know ARM Mobile more. So we've got one more webinar coming up just on what's new in ARM. So nothing too specific to the mobile app, but just the changes that have been added to ARM this last year. Hopefully we'll be seeing you maybe at that one next week. So thanks everybody. And hopefully we'll be talking to you soon in some form or another. So.